Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be our next Netflix Avatar The Last Airbender episode review. This one's going to be for N102 Warriors, the second episode of the season. I'm going to be your main host, Morgan Airspeed Prime, and joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So yeah, we'll jump straight in here pretty much. We have the second episode to talk about here. So yeah, we'll just jump in with general thoughts. So I'll start us off here. Overall, I think this is another very good episode of Netflix Avatar. This is I think it is an episode that makes a lot of sense to expand out into its own episode because there's been so much Kyoshi hype over the last couple of years in the fandom. With the novels and just like with, Suki becomes a main character, all this stuff works together to, I think, highlight that, yeah, you need to place particular importance on adapting this sort of stuff. And I think they do a pretty good job here. They do some 103 on the Zuko side of things here. And we do 104, just quite heavily expanded out. But there are some changes. Zhao's here, and it's an interesting one. But I think the characterization stuff that happens here is pretty good, and kind of like the first episode, another episode where I don't have that many issues with. There'll be little bits and pieces I think to talk about, like there will be with every episode, but another one I'm pretty positive on overall. But Greg, what are your overall thoughts on Warriors?
Yeah, no, I think I would agree with most of that. I think I definitely came out of this episode with a more positive than negative sort of reaction to any of the things. And, they definitely have changed enough of this that I think you can sort of see that pretty clearly, even if you're not sort of really deep into Avatar stuff like that. And yeah, definitely with everything surrounding Kyoshi and everything, I forget sort of the timelines of like the productions and all that sort of stuff, but it definitely feels like they keyed into the fact that Kyoshi has had, more recent popularity than ever before, and they sort of definitely emphasis that highlight, which I think, for people who like Kyoshi and everything like that, I think this is definitely, one of the standouts as far as that goes. If you don't like her, then I can see why that might not be as highlighted. You might want it to sort of stick with sort of the other things. But for me, it definitely, felt like it was in line with what they were sort of going for. And the changes that they did, have in this one that are more sort of, stand out-ish, I think, they explain it within the context of this sort of series in this episode. So they don't bother me personally as much. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we'll jump into this one. So with a recap here. So we start off with Zuko angrily looking for his notebook. We get a really just fun performance moment of just the way Dallas says he ran. He really goes in on this one. He's just stunned that the Avatar would run away from him. Iroh notes that because they're in a quiet part of the world, that they actually have that to their advantage. There are only a few key locations Aang could possibly go to hide out, so it's not as bad as it seems. Like, he's not just gone for good and will be years tracking him down. So a nice contrast here of just Zuko feeling that, like, oh, it's all fallen through my hands, and no, actually, it's not that bad. But thoughts on this opening scene?
Yeah, no, it definitely feels like he went for it as sort of the idea of everything is the worst in the world, but it's really not. And I like that Iroh, as we've sort of expect from Iroh, is able to sort of calm him down relatively sort of quickly. This feels pretty much in line with what I would have thought here. But yeah, definitely sort of the coward thing is definitely sort of being sort of played up here, which this is more just sort of the initial sort of, coward reaction of the airbender. And I don't know, I guess, in some regards it kind of makes sense in terms of airbenders, in terms of like the void and the vade and that whole sort of mentality here. But most people in this sort of era don't really have an understanding of airbenders, right, or air nomad culture. So there's all that sort of missing. I do wonder if he did have the notebook, if he would have known more quickly where Aang might have actually gone, per the region, and there just not being a lot of different places. So maybe he really does need the notebook more than he thought he did. But, that's sort of the counterpoint to what Iroh's saying, right?
Hmm. Um, then we see Aang with the notebook. So he uses the notebook to basically decide that, yeah, Kyoshi Island is going to be the place where we should go next because I can go to Kyoshi's shrine and maybe get some information there on how to control the Avatar state. So we're directly bringing that up here because, of course, the Avatar state itself being referred to like that doesn't happen until book 2 in the original, even though we see it a couple of times. So they're bringing some 201 in here, and this kind of gets into maybe some of the questions about some of these adaptation changes about, like, say, how does this affect like later books in terms of like, are they going to do anything with Avatar Day if they get book 2, and sorry, Avatar State if they get book 2. But we'll get to that more, I suppose, when we see this episode and what they do. But yeah, that's just a quick one, deciding that, okay, this is why Aang decides to go to Kyoshi Island. It's not because of the elephant koi or riding on animals. It's the notebook in this version. But thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's okay that he has like a different motivation because this version of Aang is really sort of focused on understanding the Avatar state and what it sort of entails. Like he doesn't have the sort of super happy-go-lucky idea of that, nothing's wrong in the world or that I can like ignore the world for a little bit longer. Like this version of Aang is already sort of like been brought down that, all right, I got something that I need to do. I'll need some help. I just don't know how to do it at all. And he still struggles from time to time here. But yeah, he's just sort of, understanding that at least there's some place where he can go to maybe sort of get answers. And, Sokka and Katara have their own sort of, idea of how things may or may not work out.
Hmm. Then we cut to Sokka and Katara. Interestingly, Sokka's like, oh, well, we helped him. Let's go home. And Katara's a bit shocked that he has such this kind of blunt response to this. That like, hey, like, we're not going to help him the whole way. Like, I thought that was the whole idea. She really feels that it's their responsibility now to protect Aang. That's what they need to do as part of this kind of partnership. Sokka thinks Aang is dangerous after what just happened, of course, but Katara basically does think that this is their destiny. She feels that like she is improving being here, both in terms of her bending and just this is her chance to do something beyond the tribe. And she feels she can't really go back now that she's on this path. So I definitely like this scene for Katara. A little bit of sort of the skeptic Sokka kind of bit coming out here, but mostly I think it's pretty fine what they do here. It's just it's obviously the slightly odd way that they did the, like, I kind of wish they had done the proper like Gran sends them off, rather than kind of having some of the slight kind of just weirdness around like Gran technically did, as we kind of get revealed in just a second, but we didn't kind of see it. But the characters are like, oh, we're going home now, aren't we? There was just a little bit of suddenness when Sokka said that when I was watching this the first time, of just like, oh yeah, this is the way they're doing it, and it's just a little odd. But your thoughts on this Sokka Katara scene?
Yeah, I don't know. I think Sokka feels a bit more sort of, I don't know, maybe pragmatic in sort of ways that he's sort of dealing with things here. Like he's very sort of like one step oriented in terms of like, okay, we did this, now we can do this. Okay, now we did this, now we can do this. And that's sort of how he's, I guess, attempting to deal with all the sort of craziness that is going on here. Like he's, he still is like, okay, this is a bit above our sort of like pay grade, right? Like, so like, how are we really going to save the world? Which, I don't know, to me seems like, that seems like a perfectly idea, way to go about things. Like, saving the world seems pretty huge considering sort of what's been going on for the last sort of 100 years. But, Katara sort of has the overriding sort of sense of idea here, and that sort of, gets, Sokka to come along and continue on to the journey, right?
Mm-hmm. Next, we see that something is in Katara's bag, and what comes out is a winged lemur. And so this is, of course, the reveal of Momo here, another surviving kind of air nomad animal here. And Aang is, of course, excited to see this because he's used to be on the mountains the whole time. He remembers winged lemurs. So also, because Momo was rooting around in the bag looking for food, it's revealed that there's a waterbending scroll in Katara's bag and a note from Gran Gran with it. And so we get this kind of narration of Gran Gran kind of reading the letter here of like she really struggled over the years keeping this scroll from Katara, knowing she was a waterbender. But while they were being so cautious about firebenders and what happened, she had to keep it from her. But now that Katara is going kind of out into the world, Gran Gran feels that Katara needs it to improve. That this is hers. I did like the mention of that like it belongs to you just by virtue of the fact that you are the only one who can use it, the last waterbender in the south. I will say with the letter here, this kind of further maybe highlights the idea of like the intent of obviously Gran Gran is that she was aware they were leaving. Katara kind of was aware, but Sokka wasn't quite. But you know, that's just that slight. That's an interesting one. But still, I think this is a fun little moment here. I think Momo also looks pretty good. Again, they do have the thing of like select shots for Momo, when a big part of Momo was that in the animation they did just kind of throw him in just doing random stuff in the background, and it was always a fun part of the episode, seeing that like Momo has his almost own little arc in the background, whereas it's a very like you have to factor in the budget every time you use Momo, and you know, he doesn't maybe get as many scenes as you perhaps want, but still, he looks pretty cool. He's still here and he looks nice. But what are your thoughts on this scene, the reveal of the waterbending scroll here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I like that, you know, it was sort of, you know, that it's already in her sort of possession here. Like, this is another one of those sort of like, you know, they're compressing the timeline of things, right? So they got to speed things up, and she has to get to like a certain level at a certain point and certain sort of competency, right? So I don't know. I like that, you know, she got it at this point in time. It feels like, I don't know, it feels like in this world and the way that they're sort of, you know, showing the bending and how sort of, you know, offensive it can be used, that she should probably be able to like do something sooner rather than later in terms of like, you know, actually able to sort of like protect herself and stuff like that. So that part I sort of liked here. It does seem a little bit odd that, you know, there was sort of this, you know, it seems to us, at least at the viewer, that it was unclear how the sort of like official sort of like send off between, you know, the Gran Gran was with them here. And I don't know, did Sokka know? Did Sokka not know? Does that even sort of really, you know, sort of matter in the context of how they're sort of trying to show things here? Because it almost seems like it's more of a reluctance to let them sort of go in this sort of context here compared to what we saw sort of before. But no, for the most part, I think it worked.
So yeah, at this point, Sokka agrees to stay, but first, Aang has something he needs to do. So he basically lays kind of Gyatso's kind of necklace to rest and kind of says some kind of final words here. He says his goodbyes. It's quite sad in terms of like Aang talks about how like, you know, I'm sorry I wasn't there for you kind of in the end. He does apologize for this. So it's very much like Aang blaming himself for what happened, not being around, and even though it's maybe not said directly here, but the idea of like if I was there, kind of could something have happened, but I wasn't there. And he's sorry for that. So I like this scene, kind of these words, and it definitely relates to the arc going on here. So I like that they took the time to actually do this, like right as we're wrapping up the 103 stuff here. But your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I thought this was a great scene. It was very good for Aang to have some sort of, you know, closure here. Like it's not all perfectly done, it's not all good and everything like that, but at least there's some sort of understanding of, you know, maybe things could have been different, but this is sort of the way that they are right now, and I have to sort of move forward from it, right?
Then so yeah, they leave the Southern Air Temple at this point. Momo has not come with them yet, but as they're flying, Momo kind of flies up next to them. this is where Aang reveals that he had called Momo, and he properly kind of joins the team at this point. And he definitely changes the mood a bit from the kind of somber, like, funeral, effectively, to now we have a new member of the group. It's almost a weird referencing of the whole idea of that original kind of story idea of, like, Momo was Gyatso reincarnated type thing, which they apparently at one point toyed with in the writer's room on the original, but an interesting one. So yeah, Momo joins the group. I think we saw that in a lot of the trailers, this scene. This was one of the first things we ever saw. So we swap over to Zuko and Iroh. So they're at the port here. So this is the Zhao introduction, that we're basically the regional Fire Nation commander has his headquarters here at this port. He'll know about, like, all the kind of goings on, and they kind of just discuss this idea of, like, basically, Uncle, don't reveal any information. I don't want anyone else to know we found the Avatar. But Iroh's like, no. You have to learn how to do this properly, where you get the information without revealing what information you have, basically. And you could tell Iroh's maybe not fully thinking this through, because he's constantly distracted by all the food at the stands that's going on here. And Zuko knows something's going to go wrong, but a nice little kind of setup here just before we meet Zhao. But any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely one of the scenes that's, like, pulled right from, what we've seen before, right? I think this does good. This is one of the ones where it's a little moment. It's like, not a big thing in the grand scheme of things, but it shows their sort of dynamic here. And, Zuko still has to learn, and Iroh's still, like you said, he's probably distracted by the ongoings around him, but he still has a sense of what they're trying to do here. So it's a fun scene.
Mm-hmm. So after this, the gang arrive at Kyoshi Island. We get the overhead shot here as they arrive, and they immediately land kind of right up next to the statue, kind of on the hill. They don't do the usual kind of beach landing that they did in the original. Sokka, in a kind of funny little scene, just immediately goes inside the shrine, just like pays no attention to anything else, just walks right in, and it shocks Katara and Aang. But immediately they're ambushed by these female warriors who appear out of nowhere. And Katara gets grabbed, Aang gets grabbed, Sokka walks back out, he immediately gets thrown to the ground by Suki, and they say that basically, we're capturing you because you're on sacred ground. And they try to convince them that, like, hey, this is the Avatar, like, he's allowed to be here. And they're like, prove it. And this is when the Kyoshi statue actually glows, responding to Aang, confirming that, he is in fact the Avatar. So, nice little introductory scene that is accurate to the original. It's just like it takes place, like, in a slightly different location, but it still gets the exact same kind of ideas across. But it also introduces this dynamic of how they're doing kind of past lives in this version of the adaptation, which is that each avatar has a specific shrine where you can make a strong connection to that specific avatar. So I think this all works pretty well. But what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I thought this was a great sort of introduction for, the Kyoshi warriors here, and sort of their sort of ability here, and how, I guess, sort of sneaky and quiet they can be. So no, I thought this was a good one here, and the fact that we get to see sort of the statue sort of react to Aang here, sort of getting our first sort of idea of how this sort of all sort of interacts with each other, even if we don't quite get it yet, was a good showing.
Mm-hmm. Then we get, of course, a new scene here with our new character here, and that is Yukari, who is the leader of Kyoshi Island and also Suki's mother. So this is completely new. This is like kind of show original kind of canon. It's very difficult to know what to do with maybe some of the new information that the show presents in terms of, like, can you apply any of it to the original? But I think the rule of thumb is, like, unless they basically say it's also canon to the original, you can't just do it, basically. But anyway, what happens in this scene is that she is very cautious. She is obviously presenting the isolationist style Kyoshi Island, that they've kept out of the war, and they've kind of kept themselves safe because of that. Aang kind of talks to her and is like, hey, I just want to know about Kyoshi, that's why I'm here. but she is quite suspicious of everything going. Slightly dismisses the claim of like, oh, something happened with the statue and that confirms everything. But Aang does manage to actually connect to her. He speech about how in my kind of era we all used to help each other, and that if you help me to learn to be the Avatar, I can help everyone else. This basically convinces Suki that Aang is like good of heart, and Suki kind of basically manages to convince her mother that you should also kind of be let them stay here for at least a little bit. So a nice little scene here where Yukari kind of admires Suki's kindness, but kind of feels that this could be taken advantage. But she agrees to give them 2 days on the island, basically in honor of the fact that Kyoshi was helped by many others during her time as the Avatar, and they'll do the same for the new Avatar. So I think a pretty successful first scene. This is, I think, a pretty good change, because effectively Yukari replaces Oyaji, who was never the most interesting character, and in a way with like future kind of Kyoshi lore, it maybe never made the most sense that the quote-unquote leader of the main village was a man versus like what the whole idea of the island is really like about. So this kind of fits a little bit better, adds a bit extra onto kind of Suki's story as well, but it still gets across a lot of the same basic ideas, that Kyoshi Island is isolationist. That's always somewhat clear. The exact extent of it, maybe it's slightly kind of different. There may be a little bit more kind of hard line on kind of outsiders 100% here, but I like this scene. Katara will relate back to this in a second, that this is a quite strong Aang scene in terms of interacting with people. And I like that sort of Yukari is kind of a more jaded kind of version of Suki, that she was maybe like this when she was younger, but Suki is representing that currently because she's more open to everyone. So yeah, I definitely really like this scene. Your thoughts on the introduction here of Yukari and Suki?
Yeah, no, I thought this was a great scene. I think, yeah, the changes here for, the different sort of leader of the village, I think everything like that works fine for me. I think, I don't think it was such a key thing, the original character from the show, that it would have been like such a huge thing, at least not to me, that, they changed it up this way. And like you said, the fact that there's a connection with Suki, I think that only makes it more sort of interesting, just in terms of their relation here and how that works in terms of the village. And then, later on when we see what she can do, she's just a cool character in general. So no, I like this. I think, the fact that Aang's able to sort of win people over with his sort of, ability to talk and to connect with people, as we, see later on more emphasized, I think it's definitely a standout moment.
Mm-hmm. So Suki kind of brings the group out. Sokka and Suki get to talking here. He tries to kind of make a connection with her because, hey, we both have responsibilities. I totally get why you were super cautious about us. We're both warriors. We're both protectors of our home. Suki kind of counters here by kind of being like, hey, how are you protecting your home when you're here, not at your home? And Sokka gets all kind of flustered and roughly gets across the idea that, like, well, I'm trying to save the world, and by saving the world I'll protect the village and basically everyone. But everyone's just a little bit like, go on, Sokka, dig the hole a little deeper here. But yeah, Sokka comes back around to the idea, like, we're both warriors. But Suki gets a bit upset at this, kind of that, hey, don't say that so lightly, like, I am a Kyoshi warrior, not just a warrior. We represent so much, like, we protect, but also it is a way of life, basically. And this is just a scene where, like, Sokka ends this one a little bit like, okay, I'll stop talking now. This is where we get into the most kind of heaviest example of, like, they don't at any point in the episode do the Sokka sexism arc. So it gets replaced with maybe some of these early Sokka Suki scenes being more that Sokka is a little bit kind of braggy about his position when it's not the same level as, like, Suki's kind of like lifetime being a warrior, devoting herself to it. and so they just kind of humble Sokka so he stops talking so much about it. Um, I think they could have just done it as they needed to do in the original, because you can get across the idea, because of like the history of the tribe, that Sokka doesn't have much experience seeing kind of female warriors and stuff like that. And I think it would have hit a little bit harder, because I think the dynamic here between Sokka and Suki is good, and the portrayal is good enough that they could have worked with the sort of slightly more challenging kind of material of the kind of sexism arc. Because it does come across just a little bit kind of awkward here, where like I get what they're trying to point out in terms of what Sokka does that's kind of wrong to force Suki to kind of respond to him, but it's also like you can also interpret it as like, does he really say anything bad here to warrant being like put down so much here? So that's the only, I think, thing maybe in almost in the whole episode that just feels like this is a bit more awkward than it probably should be, and it's like you had an original that worked perfectly type thing. But what are your thoughts on the Sokka Suki scene?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think the female warrior part, it probably would have worked well here, even if we didn't have the earlier scenes where he was, sort of having the same sort of similar issues with Katara, just because, just the idea of the warriors that you're just not familiar with. But I guess, the idea that I think he did have at least sort of like one, younger girl, or maybe two, sort of in his sort of, group of, village protectors that, maybe wouldn't have quite made as much sense in this sort of context here, in regards to him being sort of put down as much. I mean, I don't know. I think they try to make it seem more put down than it really is, because it really feels like, yeah, Sokka's trying to brag a little bit, but he's not. I don't know. It doesn't feel like he's going too far. He just doesn't really sort of understand the context of what a Kyoshi warrior really is in this sort of sense here, which, I guess if that's something that you've dedicated your whole life to, you might still get upset with it, regardless of if the person, understood the context or not. So I don't know, but I think you definitely do see sort of the connection that they could have here, even from the beginning, even if it is sort of put off on the wrong foot here. So I think they at least do a good job in that regard of, showing that there is something that could be there, at least from this sort of initial sort of contact that they have with each other.
Mm-hmm. And then I will add that I do think, based on like a Suki scene like coming up, that you get the idea that like Suki is not super familiar with outsiders, so that like part of this scene is also Suki maybe going off a little bit too hard on Sokka for not really all that much, because she's maybe used to this insane level of Kyoshi warrior respect, whereas he's more of a casual warrior just talking to another warrior he has met. That's kind of part of it. So like I can excuse it like a little bit, but again, it's one of those ones where I do ultimately feel that this is where maybe you didn't need to do the changes as much, but we'll go on. So this is then where we get the introduction of Zhao. So Zhao introduces himself to Iroh and Zuko. Their approach here, and this is where Iroh reveals he maybe hasn't thought through his own plan all that much. He's just like, we want to find out the kind of like migration patterns of shark squids. Do you have any information on this? And Zhao immediately is like, okay, but like you can tell he's angling for something here. He knows that they have plans. He agrees to help, but obviously he's planning something here. So yeah, it's a pretty brief, more or less accurate kind of introduction of Zhao here, of just Zuko wants nothing to do with him, but Zhao is trying to now insert himself into some business that he can see is happening here. But your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think this was a good introduction for Zhao here. I think even if this is, a bit premature from what we've seen before, I think, in terms of, what they're trying to get information about, how, I guess you could say, wrong they're going about this, it feels like it fits what they're trying to do here, and that there's something going on, but we don't, want to share what it is, and they're just trying to sort of get past the next stage. So I don't know. I like this sort of initial sort of, confrontation that they're having here.
Mm-hmm. Next scene. Suki kind of randomly sneaks up on Sokka. She kind of like appears out of nowhere as he's kind of washing, just kind of getting changed in the morning or whatever. And she just like is like, hey, there's food if you want it in the kind of main hall. And she quickly leaves because she realizes she was like staring at him because he's not wearing a shirt. So you get that sense of like, are there many men on the island? I guess not, because the way she stares is like she's seeing a whole different species here. It's definitely a fun scene for Suki, just getting across that like the idea with her character here is that like she has not seen any of the outside world, and through Sokka and the others, she's kind of seeing that for the first time here. So this was definitely a fun scene, and they start the kind of I think they do it 3 times here. The whole you should really wear a bell or something like that to alert people to your presence. Yeah, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, no, it's a nice sort of beginning of whatever they're going to try to do between the two of them here. And yeah, it does really highlight the idea that this version of Suki isn't as worldly, or isn't as sort of able to interact with people, or maybe just the opposite sex, as well as what we've seen sort of before here. So I think it's definitely an interesting way that they're choosing to go with her character.
Mm-hmm. Next, Katara practices her waterbending with the scroll. Aang praises her for improving, of course, and she says that he should practice too. And then he has a bit of a weird moment where he's like, maybe later. They sort of address it here with the idea that like he is so used to doing all of his bending training with Gyatso that he's now sort of struggling to move on in his training and be trained basically by someone else. So Katara's just like, that's a bit of a problem, but okay, I'll lighten the mood here. So she starts a water splash fight with him, and the scene ends up kind of fun here. So yeah, kind of cool little moment here. They're bringing in a bit of kind of 109 into this episode more because they have the scroll at this point. They at least address like, hey, shouldn't you learn too as well? And it's a bit of an interesting dynamic, bringing up that like he's still holding back here because he only views Gyatso as the one who trains him basically. But what were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I don't know, it's something to see how they're sort of going about bringing sort of Aang, towards this sort of understanding of that things have changed and he needs to change with it. Because it seems in some cases that he's ready to let go of sort of what's happened in the past, and other times it seems like he's still not quite there. And I guess that's kind of sort of understandable. It's a journey, it's a progress that you have to make towards getting to that point where you're willing to do that here. So I don't know. Other than that, it's a nice scene between the two of them here, and just more the sort of, I guess, sort of fun, playful side of Katara that I guess we sort of didn't see maybe initially as much from that character.
Yeah, because we didn't do the penguin sledding sequence in the opening episode. Obviously for budget reasons,
Yeah.
that I guess would have been an insane budget thing potentially. So I understand them not doing that. But I would have liked to seen at least a penguin. But yeah, next, Aang shows off some of his airbending when someone asks, hey, are you an airbender? And then he plays with the kids. Here's, I suppose, your reference to the Aang shows off Katara gets jealous plot from the original, but they don't really like go in on it in the same way that they do here. Instead, Katara just notes how like easily Aang connects to people and can just immediately jump to playing with them, meeting them for the first time. She sees that this is like his real strength as the Avatar here is that he has this kind of connection, and it's kind of this idea that like, oh yeah, when the war comes to an end, like he can unite the nations again type thing, which is what happens. But then right as she's finished praising him, he air scooters right into this owl statue that's right there. And Sokka, of course, jokes that like, yep, that's the savior of the world right there. But again, it's a fun scene to see, Aang being playful, Katara getting I think the real sense of like, Aang's strength is nice to see. But yeah, good scene. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think Understanding, you're getting more into sort of Aang's sort of character here and seeing where he's going to end up finally, near the end where he's actually able to sort of interact with people. He's able to sort of win them even more sort of over, he has the idea of like, just a general good sense of, most people that he interacts with, right? Like that's sort of what they're sort of trying to get across here. And, it's a really short one, it's a harken back to the original one and how they sort of did that. And it's nice that Qatar is able to sort of see this sort of already at this point in time, right? Like it's not something that we're gonna sort of take forever to sort of understand the sort of concept of his character, and Sokka's sort of just being sort of his normal sort of Sokka self here, so that all works.
Then we have Suki talking to Yukari. Yukari can note that like Aang has kind of brought like fun and excitement to the village. Suki can definitely see it here. But Yukari does stress that there were days when they lived in fear from the Fire Nation, and this is why they've avoided getting involved in anything. Of course, there's a reason. Suki reacts to this by like, yes, avoided. We do that a lot here, that there's so many things that they always try to avoid, and they're not really connected to anything. And she, as she says this, she of course looks towards Sokka off in the distance, and you can sort of see that she sees the kind of freedom he has, traveling the world, starting on his journey, still kind of stuck here in the sort of set in their ways, Kyoshi Island, it's a bit strict, but you can tell she's also becoming more and more intrigued by Sokka as well. And so we get the idea of just that, like, Yukari stresses the idea of things are safe, but while they're safe, Suki is like not really happy here. Yukari notes that like Aang's fun, but he could bring danger with him because he is the Avatar, and so it's definitely an interesting scene, getting across like the contrast of the like Suki's want for kind of freedom, and that she wants to kind of go on an adventure herself, but has her own duties, and but she hasn't interacted with the group that much just yet, that sort of thing. So another, I think, really good scene that, this is what you can do when you have like two main characters like on your island versus like in the original, like Oyaji was just there to be a kind of intro. It was mostly just Suki in this episode, and this is the benefit you have of having like the connection here to give Suki more. But good stuff. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they do, Suki and her mother Yukari already have this sort of connection, and they already have this sort of back and forth between sort of wanting to see the world versus wanting to protect the island, and knowing sort of the stuff that's out there and not knowing what's out there, creates a interesting dynamic here. And Aang just sort of being on the island just sort of flips everything upside down, right? Like that's just sort of what happens when you have an outside sort of force there that they're not used to having here. So it's definitely something to sort of keep in mind, sort of just going forward and seeing how this Suki sort of reacts to everything.
Next, Zhao gets a report from his lieutenant, whose name is Dang, I think. So he has talked to Zuko's crew and basically tells Zhao that, like, yeah, they basically told me, Zuko found the Avatar, then they lost him. Zhao, of course, wants to take advantage of this because this is where the ambition starts to come out. He sees a chance to advance his career. So this is just setting the seeds here of, like, Zhao now, okay, I'm properly interested. I'm just not just going to send them on their way. I'm going to get involved with this. But any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a quick scene here, but it really sort of sets the stage of what, I guess Zhao's willing to do, and his sort of, I guess, his resources and what he's, wants to do and how he views himself as a character. Is getting that across really, really quick here.
Then we get another Sokka-Suki scene. So Sokka's practicing with his boomerang, as once again Suki suddenly appears behind him, shocking him. He tells her that he made his boomerang himself and that it's useful when fighting and hunting. He hunts tiger whales, and he knows how dangerous they are. He shows her how he throws it. He hits the target. Suki then takes out her fan, throws it, and slices all of the targets. Sokka then is kind of like, that was very good. We're kind of a little bit more hand-to-hand focused in the Water Tribe. And she immediately gets into a position to like spar with him hand-to-hand. And so she immediately gets him in a chokehold. And when she releases him, Sokka just like immediately walks off. And her reaction is kind of like, oh, I did a bit too much there, didn't I? Because she doesn't speak too much during this, and like she lets him do a lot of the talking, and there's a real sense that like, oh yes, I think I handled this interaction kind of poorly. So again, I think this is very good. I just think there is a little bit of a sense of like, what exactly are we doing here? Like are we playing up that like Suki doesn't really know how to interact with people because like it's an outsider, and this is her first time trying to be a bit more like adventurous interacting with like Sokka here, because it's not as like clear in a way as it is in the original. There's just that weird sense of like some slight nuances of this that I'm not quite necessarily understanding. But what's your take on this? Is this just kind of like awkward Suki basically more than anything, or is it still Sokka speaking too much about his skills, bragging a little?
I mean, I guess you could definitely say that it's a bit of both, but I personally skewed it more towards the Suki sort of awkwardness rather than, Sokka trying to be super, braggy, manly, whatever type, character that, we've sort of known that he's been sort of before. Because it definitely feels like with the way that she speaks so little, and the fact that like, when they do the sort of hand-to-hand spar, like she grabs him out of like his stretch mode, which, of course is just Sokka sort of being maybe a little bit weird, but that's sort of his character in general. But yeah, definitely, it's definitely an odd sort of setup here, but it's definitely just the way that they're sort of choosing to go with this character. So far, I think I'm on board with the most part of this, version of Suki being a little bit sort of, I guess, stunted in sort of the social interactions of just people in general. I don't know if it's maybe because it's a boy or just because of, just someone not from the village that she's had to interact with directly anymore. But either way, I think it's, for the most part, is working towards what they're sort of ending up with.
Mm-hmm. Then we cut to Katara and Aang in the Kyoshi Shrine. So this is where we get the first kind of Kyoshi information. They're not finding anything about the Avatar state or like stuff that Kyoshi said about how to train to be the Avatar. But Katara does mention some interesting things she has found out about Kyoshi, that she was an orphan. She was hired as a house girl for the richest family on the island. She was quiet and kind. And initially no one had a clue that she was the Avatar. This, of course, shocks Aang because he contrasts that quiet, kind, unassuming to this amazing kind of mural on the wall depicting basically Kyoshi full power defeating Chin the Conqueror, and the whole only justice will bring peace thing, that she's like one of the most legendary avatars, yet that's her origin basically. So interesting. This is clearly Rise of Kyoshi references. Is it entirely accurate to say like a house girl for the richest family on the island? It's like, yes, but like the details are that like what Janju bought the mansion, and like it wasn't, he bought it specifically for kind of those reasons, and like as it related to like Yoon, not because of it was the richest family. And like, is it referring to the stuff before then? But I think it was more like farmers kind of brought her in, and they kind of she ended up with like various different families before Kelsang took her in. So it's not entirely like 100% accurate, but as a, I suppose, one line summation of her story, I guess like it's fine overall. But it's I suppose if you made it more specific, you have to go into more detail probably, because if you mention like Avatar Mansion, you probably have to get into a few more details. So I'm okay with that. I don't immediately look at that and go like, hey, mistake, what are you doing? As a quick summation, I get it. I definitely get it. But I like this kind of comparison moment because it helps Aang to, I think, view his own situation of that, like, oh yeah, the avatars grow, that they're not all like, fully formed as the Avatar from the start, that I don't think I'm an avatar right now, but I can get there. Look at Kyoshi's journey. I can do something similar. Like it's an important thing to learn about avatars. That they're all different, and they are different people, and lots of stuff happens basically. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, no, the growth of the Avatar is something that, it gets stated again later on as well, but this is just sort of the initial idea to Aang that this is something that you can eventually become, right? Like you're not stuck with your where you're currently at. So I like that sort of idea here. And yeah, it does seem like, I don't know, I feel like their sort of choice of line for this is just sort of their version of what they thought sort of happened. Like maybe that's what happened, maybe that's not what happened, but that's what they sort of think on this sort of island, that sort of supported sort of Kyoshi, which I think maybe you might think that they might have a more sort of accurate detailing if we're saying that in this world it happened the same way that we know it happened, from the books and everything like that. But who's to say, maybe it's a bit sort of different here.
Hmm. Next, Aang remembers how people thought that he was lucky because he didn't have to train all that much. But he reveals that it wasn't that he never had to train, but that the reason he did have to train was to keep his powers under control. He notes that basically the others were kind of more afraid of him because of how powerful he was, and that's sort of similar to how Sokka and Katara are maybe a little bit afraid of like the Avatar state. He's afraid of the Avatar state, and he needs to get that under control. And obviously it's this idea of like this is what he needs to do. He's worried about it, but Katara says like you need to at least try to do this to get this power under control. And she's the one to remind him that like, hey, it says it here in the book. The past lives are inside of you. Like you can get information not from the books but from within yourself. So why don't you actually talk to the past life? You're in the right spot for it. And so this is what forms the main idea, the big event we're building up to, actually getting to see Kyoshi here. So this is a change, obviously, because this is kind of bringing in a piece of the storm, but changing it so that in the way it was done in the cartoon, it was more that his friends thought it was unfair for him to ever play in group activities because as the Avatar, they just like felt that it would imbalance the teams because he is stronger. Whereas here they're playing up more this idea that like he is so powerful because he's the Avatar that it puts the people around him at risk, which is a bit of a different way to do it. It's maybe doing a little bit too much. Like this is one where I don't think you have to do that because you already have brought the Avatar state stuff up before you necessarily like had to. So I didn't feel like they needed to do the change the backstory. Like he nearly killed like kids and stuff like that. That's maybe a little bit kind of leaning too much into the kind of the drama. The has to be as intense as possible when I think in the original it has a certain heart to it of just that like his friends didn't want to play with him anymore just because they like assumed a lot about what it was to be the Avatar, and there's a certain loneliness that comes from that, and that like there's a nuanced large amount of information rather than being kind of blunt in the way it's done here. But like it's not that it doesn't work what we have here. Did you have to go that far type thing, turning Aang into almost a killer? But what are your thoughts on this scene here?
Yeah, no, that is something to think about. Like, did they go too far in the sort of making him, a prodigy, that he was a danger to those around him? And I don't know. I think, maybe this is just, from the way that we're current doing media and the way that they chose to go to more sort of, I don't know, aggressive route of the story, that it seems like they're sort of making it seem like he's, that he could be sort of on edge. And they do sort of make the note, at least within these first two episodes, how sort of reluctant he is to sort of, wanting to combat people directly. But that's always been sort of part of his character, that and just air nomad culture in general, right, that they're generally not very sort of confrontational, But they seem to try to emphasize that even more with sort of his character, which I don't know if that's, needed to be, or they're just trying to put that sort of like, self-inflicted sort of like limiter on him that maybe they don't necessarily need to do. But I don't know. I think, it didn't bother me too much in terms of like what they were sort of trying to do here. Like it feels like it works. It feels like he has, this emotional sort of connection that, sort of is sort of has held him back or has held himself back. But it seems like at least at this point that he has, he's has his tattoos, right? So like he's already, proven that he's a competent airbender, right? So should that be as much of an issue for him still? But I mean, I don't know. It depends. I mean, he's gotten his tattoos so young, so maybe he hasn't had that long, enough that, he's matured into sort of his powers in that sort of way, and that's sort of still a thing that's, keeping him back at this point here. So I don't know. There's a lot that can go into that, and it is interesting how they are sort of, putting it up here in the front that he can already sort of like, connect with his inner sort of self here. But I mean, he's already had the connection with the state, so we know that he has that in him, even if he doesn't really understand what that power is, which is what this whole, episode is really about.
Hmm. Next is a kind of quick scene. Zhao heads off for Kyoshi Island. Zuko and Iroh get caught up to speed on like, oh, like Zhao went to investigate this thing on Kyoshi, something about like cows of some sort, and they realize, oh no, that's just that's a mistake. We have to follow him. He clearly knows, and that's what we're doing. It's a pretty basic scene. It's just like kind of connection, effectively. The more important scene after that is Suki leads the Kyoshi warriors in training. Sokka watches from outside and tries to copy some of their moves. She then finishes the training when she kind of spots him outside. She dismisses them. And then she basically just gives the nod, and Sokka comes in and they train one-on-one. And she helps to correct like his stance, guides him through some of the movements. And it's clear that their kind of connection here is beginning to grow. There's a lot of chemistry beginning to develop here, and we are definitely getting some kind of romantic kind of moment in terms of like catching each other's eyes, being quite close to each other and stuff like that. So definitely like a really good scene where like I think they just do in general the Suki Sokka relationship in this episode very well. And this is the scene, like even in the original, like when they finally train together, where like, yes, this is where it all comes together. And I think they do it just as well here, basically. But your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I think they definitely did this pretty well. I think it definitely works in terms of him, wanting to learn, him being corrected, them sort of having the budding sort of relationship here, him, taking, the couple random hits to sort of get into the right sort of position here. So no, I think that was done pretty well here. I think that's like, it's not, such a involved scene or anything like that. It's just to show sort of their budding connection here, and that there might be something in the future here, and to lead them to their sort of like a little bit more sort of involved sort of communication here. So no, I think that works pretty well.
Mm-hmm. So then we get to Aang by the Kyoshi statue. He's meditating in front of it. There's some initial kind of thing where he can't fully concentrate, but eventually he settles and says, he asks Kyoshi for help specifically, and this is what makes the connection. So he kind of crosses over, whatever we want to call this, into the spirit world, or just the kind of past life space, whatever way you want to call it. And Kyoshi's like, it's about time. And basically the idea is that, yeah, there's a lot that he doesn't know, and so Kyoshi has a lot to tell him, basically. I don't think there's too much to say here, because it's very much just like, Kyoshi. And we'll come back to that when we get to the more interesting kind of bits in a second. But like, do you have any thoughts on just the initial moment here?
I don't know. I mean, it's just like what we've seen before when he did it initially to sort of Roku, just that we're in sort of a different sort of context, and it's a lot, earlier on in the season where like they still have this sort of glow eyes. It still connects to him. He has sort of the initial sort of resistance here. He's not sure what he's doing. But no, it's a nice sort of set up here, and that they're sort of doing it in this sort of, like you're saying, like this inner mind spirit space, and how they're sort of choosing to make it look a little bit, different, and stuff like that.
Hmm. Zuko kind of is then kind of like pondering over his 3-year search. He thought it would never actually happen, and he's noting that like it feels worse now knowing that like Aang is so close and he's not like 3 years away, and it's just alerted to like, hey, we've arrived at Kyoshi Island. I like this scene because I think Iroh also says, and it kind of relates to some of the theming of the episode. He says that like, hope can be like, I forget the exact wording, but like hope can kind of be a bad thing in some ways, because it gets you thinking something's going to happen, and then if it doesn't, that's almost worse kind of type situation they're going for here. So it was small, but I did like this little. But do you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, this is, I don't know, it's another sort of moment where they're able to sort of connect with each other, right? Like there's not much there, but it's enough sort of things here that, we're just getting more sort of, I guess you could say, characterizations on them. And just sort of, where's Zuko's sort of mind? And I don't know, it almost feels like it's one of those things where he's almost getting through to Zuko in terms of like what's sort of happening and how you might, properly should feel about this certain situation, but then they get, sort of interrupted right before the moment actually happens.
Mm-hmm. Then we get the kind of bigger kind of Sakasuki scene. So they continue their training. Sokka at this point is able to get a temporary advantage over Suki, kind of like flips her onto the ground. She immediately does reverse it, and they kind of get up. He notes that like you're a great teacher. She notes that he's an excellent student, but that you're probably greatly helped by your previous training that you've done. And Sokka kind of has a bit of a reaction to this. Clearly, like the previous training maybe hasn't been as successful, and he kind of notes that there's not as much of a need for a real warrior where he's from, and kind of maybe the truthful aspect of it is that like, yes, I am the guardian of the tribe, I am a warrior technically, but I kind of don't feel like it because I don't get to do that stuff as much. But she says, no, I do consider you a real warrior. But he says, no, I'm nothing like you, a real warrior. You're a non-bender, but you're one of the best fighters I've ever seen. But she just says that as a non-bender, you need to be better than the benders, like will, desire, heart. And she says that she envies Sokka and wishes that she could leave home, wonders what the world outside is like, but she never had the courage to actually like make a move to actually leave. It is revealed that Yukari is kind of listening outside and overhears kind of her daughter's like true feelings about this. Sokka and Suki then go to kiss, but a bell goes off, and they kind of make the connection to the whole Sokka said you should wear a bell, and he thinks that's what it is, but no, it's the town alarm. An attack is coming in. So yeah, again, this is a really well done dynamic. I like the stuff that they get to here, in that like, I suppose this is sort of your replacement of like for the I'm a warrior but I'm a girl too type thing in a way, just because it relates to it sort of, in terms of just her acknowledging him as a warrior, even though they are different. Like she's in this like elite team, the leader of an elite team. He's a more kind of protector of his tribe type thing, but it gets the kind of points across, and then she's so comfortable around Sokka, like she reveals her true feelings to him before like her mother, and that highlights the connection and stuff like that. So they hit all the points I think they need to here, so it's pretty successful. But what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I would agree that it's pretty successful. I think that you can pretty plainly, clearly see sort of the connection forming between the two of them, and that they're very sort of comfortable with each other, just in this sort of short amount of time that they've been together, right? Like it hasn't really been that sort of long or anything like that. So I don't know. I think that worked pretty well. I mean, I think, sure, there's other ways, and there's the way that they did it originally that, also sort of worked as well. But I think for the way that they're sort of speeding things up and they're trying to sort of keep it, tweaked a little bit, I think this worked well enough.
And then I personally didn't have a problem with it, but I have seen some people note that one change they obviously do make here is that Sokka is not made to put on Kyoshi Warrior like attire during the training here. And I've never minded it that much, just because like the whole point is that like only the women train as Kyoshi warriors, so like even as a like let's humble him type thing, I wouldn't get maybe why they would do that in the first place. So I think they made the right choice, slightly changing it. Like, it's fun in the original to see Sokka in the whole kind of get up, but I think it's fine the way they do it here. But do you have any thoughts on that Sokka in Kyoshi Warrior outfit?
Yeah, no, I didn't even really think about that. I mean, he has like the armor, some of it on, right? But he doesn't have the full sort of get up and everything. And Suki herself actually takes off her face paint there for, I guess extra added connection moment there, right? So I don't know. It didn't feel like it had as much of a place here as it did in the other one, like you were saying.
Yeah. Indeed. So yeah, we get a quick cut out to Katara, who's very worried because the attack basically is coming in, but Aang is still communicating with Kyoshi and he's defenseless, and you can tell that she's kind of freaking out that, oh, I'm gonna have to defend him here. Again, just a small one, but I like that you could sort of get that kind of frantic panic of like, oh, I have to fight on my own here. Am I going to be okay? And she's kind of building up the kind of the bravery and the courage here. But any thoughts on that little quick scene with Katara?
Yeah, that is something that to note there, that she's, because this is like, we've seen this how it works in the an original sort of series here, but this is very early on, and she doesn't have the same sort of skill set or just sort of willingness to do this per se. And how would you get someone out of like the spirit world, or their own sort of internal meditation zone here? So yeah, that's definitely a perilous situation to be in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And then we get into Kyoshi. So she tells him that the role of the Avatar is a complex one. You need to basically be multiple things at once. You need to be a guardian, a general, a mediator, and a guide. You need to be strong to do many of these things well. That Aang needs to learn the elements and gain control over the Avatar state. That's like the important part of like becoming strong to do these things as the Avatar. That the Avatar state is dangerous, but only really if it's uncontrolled. But if you can control it, it becomes the ultimate weapon, one that can save your life. So it's basically doing the whole defense mechanism Avatar state explanation here in not as many words. So they're completely bringing this up like a season ahead of time. Kyoshi is explaining all of this stuff like pretty much immediately. I do like the kind of just mention of like, yeah, the Avatar needs to be a bit of everything, because they're the leader, battle leader in some cases, but they have to be a diplomat as well at the same time. And it's fitting for Kyoshi that like she maybe leans in the direction of like emphasizing strength and stuff like that. I think maybe some of the later stuff we get to, they maybe lean a little bit too much into sort of like kill everyone Kyoshi, the kind of the meme side of Kyoshi. But this first section here I think is pretty good. Like she's kind of like stern and serious with Aang, but I think it makes sense given like who this character is. But what are your thoughts on Kyoshi's first kind of major scene here?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it feels like it works for her character, at least as far as we know her, in terms of like her later on in life. Like, definitely she, had more, was just like sort of Aang in the beginning, as she mentions, in terms of being sort of questioning and not sort of understanding things. But in terms of, seeing that, the Avatar has to be everything and has to be able to sort of have the sort of, I don't know, gumption to sort of, stay at, sort of the course that they're going towards. I think that, those lines, from her, mean a lot, and they come across pretty well.
Mm-hmm. We get a scene here. Zuko, when he arrives at the village, is kind of very worried that like he's like behind on the whole situation. But Iroh's wisdom seems to give him a little bit of an edge here. Iroh kind of advises that like, yeah, basically like Zhao's just going to march straight through the middle of the city, but we can think about what we're actually doing here and realize that, where there's one Avatar, there's probably another, and directs Zuko's attention to the Kyoshi statue, and so they know exactly where they need to head. And this is where he also makes a bit of a Pai Sho reference, that this is like strategy that they're doing here. So again, another good Iroh's kind of in this case, like tactical kind of wisdom for Zuko, because you can see how worried Zuko is about being so far behind. But thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, General, I mean, Iroh was a thing, the Dragon of the West. So, like, the fact that he's able to sort of at least, understand the situation a little bit better than what's sort of happening is sort of on par with what we would expect for Iroh, right? Like, and this is the advice that Zuko needs in this moment as he, goes through this sort of situation that he didn't think he would have to deal with.
Yep. Then we get the big confrontation in the village. Zhao and his forces arrive, and Yukari is in front of the Kyoshi warriors, and we have the kind of talk between leaders here. He knows about their visitor that they've had, and they end up kind of talking to each other without fully saying what exactly they mean. Eventually he gets to the point where he's just like, yeah, and I'm going to now search the village if that's okay with you. And she kind of lets him go, but gives the signal to Suki. Suki gives the signal back. And the second a soldier walks past Yukari, she takes him out. She actually sends him flying. Like, it's a real, like, oh, she used to be a Kyoshi warrior kind of moment. The battle kind of begins here. They are going to defend their island here. They're not just going to let Zhao walk all over them. They're actually going to defend Aang, even though Yukari was so kind of cautious about, like, what will you bring to the island type situation. So yeah, this was definitely pretty good. Zhao getting a chance to kind of exert his authority, but Yukari just not letting him kind of do that. It's a nice scene, and I like that, the mother and daughter got to have that, like, yeah, we're attacking them little signal moment. But what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, that was a nice little moment there. Just like the instant sort of connection there of knowing what the other was gonna do and how to react in that sort of situation here. And yeah, I think it's, they try to sort of play it off as something that's not going to happen here, but I think it comes across pretty clear that they're not gonna let this go without sort of like any sort of say. I mean, they're warriors at heart, right?
Mm-hmm. This is when we go back to Kyoshi, and this is where she explains that each avatar is different. Each avatar is shaped by the times that they lived in. He has to figure out his role himself, and he's a little bit surprised by that there's no book for every avatar to just, this is what you have to do. You have to figure some of it out by yourself. He asks, yeah, what if I hurt someone along the way? Kyoshi gets quite serious at this point and asks how many have been hurt because he wasn't there, and that if he runs away again, even more will be hurt. Being the Avatar means putting your duties above all else, including your life. She says she was like him once, but she saw what was at stake, and she shows this to him by showing him a vision of basically the future that's going to befall the Northern Water Tribe. As he sees visions of Agna Kella under attack, buildings being destroyed, people being killed, that effectively another genocide is going to happen, this time to the waterbenders, if you don't kind of step up, become the Avatar and stop this. And so she says, for Kyoshi, being the Avatar means being the warrior, being a warrior. And then she gets very, very serious. She kind of like fully takes on the way people know her and says, a mighty, merciless warrior, as she gets ready to, there's another scene that happens, but like she's getting ready to fight. She knows she's going to do something. So that was very Kyoshi in the kind of blunt way we kind of know her as. They maybe did it a little bit too much with the crazy voice, but it's mostly, I think, pretty good. I like a lot of what they do talk about here. Kyoshi is the second character after Sokka to get quite serious with Aang over the whole idea of, like, you ran away, basically, like, running away from your responsibilities type thing. But what were your thoughts on this part of the Kyoshi conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Is it too far into the sort of, blunt Kyoshi mode, or is this more of just sort of how she would react or how, sort of any of the avatars would react in terms of, the current state of affairs. I mean, the whole sort of voice thing and everything like that. I feel like, we've seen that done from, other avatars as well. So it's not particularly unique to her. It's just sort of the intensity sometimes is from, what we think of her character, even though we've learned that, some of that intensity, has might be sort of misplaced in terms of the times of history and the real character and what she really, sort of acted like. But I think, getting the point across to Aang that you can't run away from this sort of situation. I think that was made pretty clear to him, and that's something that, he probably needs to be told more directly than in sort of a roundabout way, especially considering everything that sort of happened while he has been unfortunately away.
Hmm. Next up, we have Sokka and Suki are fighting back to back. We get a whole action sequence here. They're both pretty skilled here. Sokka putting his training to good use. They both kind of block each other's kind of blind spots. Eventually building to this kind of cool moment where Sokka gets to block Zhao's fire blast, which was aimed at Suki with the fan. And they're beginning to get a little bit overwhelmed though overall, and Yukari kind of is panicking a little bit. She's wondering, where is Aang? He's meant to save us, like where is he? And so the big setup is like we're waiting for this to happen now. So definitely some nice non-bender action stuff going on here. The fans, Sokka is still using his club in the middle of all of this as well. It got across really nicely that they have this immediate connection and can work perfectly in tandem, like as if he was on her Kyoshi Warrior squad, basically. But maybe even like a stronger duo connection than that. So that's pretty cool. But your thoughts on the action?
Yeah, no, the action was great here. Definitely their duo of working together. I think, that's like a classic trope that you see in the action stuff and everything. So them fighting back to back works pretty well. And seeing, the mom Yukari, with fans in her hand showing the skills that she has, that she's probably trained her daughter and that stuff like that. I think that works pretty well here. But yeah, it definitely feels like these forces are a little bit much for, this sort of village and sort of what they're immediately prepared to fight with, right? But it's definitely a good action scene overall.
Mm-hmm. Back to Aang and Kyoshi. Aang wonders if things might get worse. Kyoshi says that basically the Avatar being back will make things worse, that the hope of the Avatar being there will make people fight harder, and sometimes that leads to bad things happening. It won't be easy. If Aang avoids his duty, he will fail to save the world, but also the island. And this is where Aang kind of realizes, wait, the island's under attack, basically. And so he has to save the island. He has to save them from the danger he has put them in by basically bringing people there. And I guess they're just stressing the idea of like, be aware as the Avatar, especially in the situation that you're in. Anywhere you go, you might bring catastrophe upon this location because they are after you so much. I'll definitely say like they are really laying into the Aang, accept your duty. Don't be the reluctant Avatar part. Like they are hitting it like to like a borderline like overdone level. I think across a lot of this. Just because like it's the key part of his arc, obviously, but the kind of point is like early on he accepts it, and he kind of had accepted it at the end of the first episode. So there's a slight part of it that just kind of feels like you really like the characters to like really lay into Aang over this, especially when in this case it was actually a coincidence about what happened. But I get it. They're trying to really, in this live action, hyper emphasize that this is the arc. Compared to like the writing in the original, it's obviously like a little blunt, whereas I think the original let this one just kind of be there in the background the whole time, that he accepted his duty early on, and he didn't need every single character he met to kind of remind him of it, basically, that sort of idea. But what are your thoughts on this bit of Kyoshi?
Yeah, I do wonder if that are they laying it too much because of, they're just trying to drive it home, or they're trying to make it really seem like, he's going to get over this faster because, the shortened time, overall that they have to work with here. Because it definitely does feel like it. And yeah, it is sort of a bit of coincidence, that he sort of got stuck where he is, but it definitely feels like he still has some general sort of hesitancy. Like he's not, fully reluctant. He has, accept that he has to do something to get the world into a better place. He just, doesn't really understand what it is and needs more, more guidance towards that actual, end result here. So I don't know. It definitely feels like sometimes it is a bit sort of on the head in terms of what they're trying to get across, but that also could just be how they're trying to sort of characterize Kyoshi in this moment and having her sort of work with Aang directly.
Hmm. Um, this is where we see Katara kind of stand her ground. She tries to fight against Zuko. She does hit some of his soldiers down, but Zuko is too much for her at this point. She doesn't really get like injured here. It's more that like Zuko's attack, which she kind of blocks, sends her kind of like flying into the kind of the bushes basically, and she's just on the ground when everything seems to be going wrong. Like we need something to intervene to stop this from being a complete loss. Um, but like it's a nice little moment of kind of bravery. It's a pretty short exchange of a fight, but it's like okay, Katara stood up to try and protect Aang, even though at her skill level she probably knew she wasn't going to stand that much of a chance. But do you have any thoughts on this little Katara moment?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's nice to see that this is where her like sort of bravery sort of like begins, right? And she's able to use the water bending to some effect here. But yeah, it's definitely not quite at that level. But it does, force her to confront some things in her mind that she hasn't, necessarily maybe had to think of before.
Hmm. And then we cut back to Kyoshi. So she says to Aang that I will show you what the Avatar can do, basically what the Avatar state can do. So what she does here is she kind of takes control of Aang, she possesses Aang, Aang channels Kyoshi, whatever way you want to like refer to this as, and she arrives on the battlefield. So she steps in, of course, first to protect Katara, and she just effortlessly blows Zuko away and just immediately fired jets back to the village, and she arrives like a missile strike on the battlefield and just sends everyone flying. Everyone is stunned because of course for the people of Kyoshi Island, like they are seeing their avatar, and for others it's like Aang is Kyoshi, like what's going on here? But it's like a full power avatar kind of moment here, and the four element application here is pretty cool. She like sucks everyone in using like water tendrils and then kind of creates this kind of spiraling storm of all of the elements and then kind of like sends out this kind of almost explosion, and this is how she takes everyone out. And it's such an impressive kind of feat that Zhao is like not messing with this and immediately orders the retreat. And we do see Kyoshi like immediately kind of give the control back to Aang, showing us very clearly that like yes, this was some sort of a past life possession style moment. So yeah, this was definitely really good as like the first time we've properly seen the Avatar state really, go crazy. They didn't overdo it here. Like there's still room to do more, of course. But it was definitely a nice big showing of the Avatar state here to win the day basically overall. So the scene just from an action point of view definitely works pretty well here, and just like yes, relentless Kyoshi, no one stands a chance, no one really even gets a chance to fight back. It's that level of dominance. But your thoughts on Kyoshi in action?
Yeah, no, this was really cool to see. I mean, just to get to see, Kyoshi sort of jump into location two times and sort of just like you said, the initial sort of shock wave of pushing everyone away just gets away sort of the strength of that sort of character and her position and Aang's I guess eventual abilities, right? Like he doesn't quite know how to do all of that or any of that right now, but they can see, the potential there, right? And that sort of gives people hope, as they mentioned in the second here. But no, it was really cool to see that the Avatar state, how they went about using it. It definitely, I definitely can see how it can go a little bit more sort of powerful, but it's going to be interesting to see how that sort of, works with other characters or other, powerful benders that maybe aren't sort of quite as intimidating, or, try to get sort of the drop on Aang before he's able to maybe eventually channel that sort of power.
Hmm. Next up, Aang immediately realizes, yeah, he has to leave. He's put the village in danger. Yukari has had like a kind of a change of heart here and says that, the village can rebuild. Like, we haven't lost anything that can't be replaced. But Aang has given them a reason to believe again in everything, basically, themselves, the Avatar. They bow to him, and Aang bows back as just this kind of big kind of moment of respect of like, he's learned from being here, they've learned from him. Very nice little moment of like he's accepting the role here, bowing. There's a little bit of a reference to the last Airbender movie here, where they placed quite a lot of importance on sort of like Aang bowing back to accept the role kind of properly. So that's a little bit of an interesting. But yeah, definitely a nice little scene here. But there's some more resolution in the next part. But what are your thoughts on what Aang has to say here?
Yeah, no, I thought that was good that he's, it feels like he's getting to a point again where he's sort of understanding what, maybe he's been doing, and that, he can actually change minds, change hearts, for the better, right? Like, that's sort of, the idea of the Avatar, especially in this era, to sort of inspire hope and stuff like that. So I like that they were able to end this part of this sequence at this, at Kyoshi Island in this sort of way.
Mm-hmm. Next, we get the Sokka and Suki kind of resolution scene. He takes her to the side, and he wishes that they had had more time together, but she does thank him for showing her the kind of world outside, a glimpse of it. She kisses him and also gives him a Kyoshi Warrior fan. So he does have an additional weapon here, and this is not something that kind of happened in the original, but it's one where, like, I think they probably would have done something like this if in the original they knew they were going to bring Suki back immediately. They probably would have done something like this, but this is the benefit that this kind of show has, to be like, he always has this kind of memento of Suki before she actually come back later on, because they can obviously better plan out the whole plan and what they actually to do. And I wouldn't be surprised if we maybe, like, off screen for the next book get some like Suki alone stuff highlighting her decision to leave and that sort of thing. But a nice kind of goodbye scene, just highlighting the kind of connection that they had, but that there's more to come here in terms of like reintroducing this character at a later point. Definitely like a very successful, like an important relationship that I think a lot of people really like, and I think it was for the most part done really well, accounting for like the changes that they did, that in some cases, like, it was one of the more criticized changes before the show actually came out. And while I do think if they'd done it more accurately, it would have flowed a little bit better initially. The performances from Sokka and Suki, the actors, I think just made it work. There was a lot of chemistry here, and it just they really, I think, got it right overall. But your thoughts on the last Sokka Suki scene?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I definitely can feel sort of, the connection that the two of them have, and that there's something more there that, hopefully we'll get to explore in the future. And the fact that they were able to, like you said, leave, Sokka with the sort of, war fan, as, memento slash, weapon that he can use. I think that's, it's another tool in his arsenal that he can use, hopefully effective, and it'll be interesting to see, if he uses that more in the future.
Yep. So the team at this point leaves Kyoshi Island. They come back to sort of the start of the episode, and like, after this, Sokka is now more up for continuing the journey. There's no talk here about like, let's go home. Aang Sokka asks Aang the question of like, "Who can we hope to see Kyoshi again sometime? Can you use that power whenever you want?" But he says, "No, I can only call upon a past avatar at their shrine, or like in or around their shrine." So there's your kind of limitation here, so that inexperienced Aang doesn't just have access to full power avatar state whenever he wants. It has to be his life is in danger or near a basically spiritual site for a particular avatar. Makes sense. So he then reveals that we have to go to the Northern Water Tribe. Kyoshi told me that bad stuff is going to happen there. And so this is effectively the scene where we kind of settle on the idea of like, we're a team now, we're together, we're settled, I'm the Avatar, you two are coming with me, and this is the full official formation of Team Avatar basically in this moment here. So pretty nice just wrapping it up. I like the details on like, yeah, okay, clarifying the whole Avatar Shrine possession thing, just so people are aware. You can't just get out of any situation by doing that whenever you want. But your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I think this was a really good scene to sort of close out their sort of, newfound dynamic that they have as group, as friends, as, people on this adventure to hopefully, save the world and everything. So I think that they did a good job, like you said, of setting it up, explaining where, how they're going to use, Aang's sort of power, how he still, doesn't actually know everything that's going on. Like he just knows that he has to go to North and that something's happening there. I wonder, when he'll sort of, get more sort of understanding of that, but, at least they have a goal in mind, right? Like, I think that's really, helpful for the core group overall, and especially Sokka, since that seems to be his sort of thing right now as a character.
Mm-hmm. Actually, while we're here talking about it, I suppose we probably should reflect on the idea of like, how are we feeling about the whole idea that like Kyoshi was basically just able to show Aang a vision of something that was literally going to happen in the future. Because I know Roku kind of does something similar to this, but it's a bit more vague in that he's just like, the comet's coming back. Like, you might not be aware of this, but like the comet is really regular, and the time limit on like it coming back is beginning to happen. And so his sort of prediction of the future is more of a, well, logically this makes sense. Of course, this is what they're going to do tactically, and it makes sense as like this will happen. Versus here, Kyoshi literally shows him, like, I don't think it's spoiling stuff, but literally shows him clips from episode 7 and 8. That's a little bit of a weird one where it's like, I think in interviews they talked about this, that this they put in to give Aang the kind of desire to like, oh, we have to get to the Northern Water Tribe quickly. This is meant to add the urgency into the story, was that he has this, and this has to be here because they can't do the timing on the comet because they don't know what age the actors are going to be, so they can't specifically give you the comet timing in the like Roku sequence like they usually would. I can sort of accept it, but it obviously leans a little bit towards sort of quote unquote like time travel-y spirit shenanigans type things, which is in the original with the whole like, Aang saw a vision of Toph situation, but it's one of those ones where I just look at it and I'm just a little bit like, okay, but I'm not sure about this, because how much knowledge of the future do you have, Kyoshi? It's kind of like, you could see that like threat is going to happen, but like, can you see anything else? And that's always when you have future powers, it's always like, oh, we got to be careful to limit these powers, type thing. But did you have any thoughts on that little plot element coming into play? Kyoshi just tapping the head, insight chakra. Hey, look at this.
Yeah, that's, I don't know. I mean, the idea that, the past avatars would have some notion of the future events, I don't know. Sometimes it irks me, sometimes it doesn't, depending on, how they're trying to say it here. I get the idea of the urgency of getting him there in terms of like, they just have to speed things up in general. I mean, I do wonder how clear, I mean, Aang knows that he has to get there, but I wonder how clear it is for him in reality of what's actually going to happen. Like, is he going to know that, like, he needs to be at this space at this time in order to, protect this person or anything like that? Or if it's just sort of the the general notion that bad things are going to happen and I have to get there, and it just lights a fire under him just to get there that little bit sort of faster. Um, I don't know. I think, for the most part, it doesn't bother me too much. I mean, the whole thing with the sort of excluding the comet and everything, I definitely can see why that would be, upsetting to some people. But I think I don't know, in the context of just, this show and what they're sort of going for, and not, just not making that like an element at all. I mean, if you just exclude it and assuming you can do the rest of the story well enough, it won't really bother me too much, I think, in the end. But I'm not, 100% sure on that one yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I understand the comet timing thing. It's like, hey, yeah, you don't want to have a weird situation where in this book, which was filmed like 3 years ago or whatever, you say that the comet is coming in 9 months. Yet potentially you're maybe only going to start filming this maybe late next year or something like that. The actors are already going to be like 3-4 years older. Let alone when we talk about like book 3, if they ever get around to doing that. So the point is they're just waiting until they have their moment, and then they'll say, okay, in this case the comet's actually coming in 5 years, or whatever way it works with timings and stuff like that. That's very reasonable, I think. But yeah, there's that. Final scenes here. Zhao kind of tries to explain away things to Zuko. I'm like, hey, it was just an accident. I came to Kyoshi for other reasons. I didn't actually have information about the Avatar, but I know the Avatar is a thing now. Zuko, you can tell like Zhao gets one up over Zuko here when Zuko's like, don't tell anyone, and Zhao knows he kind of has him, and he says, oh, I know I won't. Let's work together and do this. We won't tell anyone. We'll help each other out here. It's just this kind of, you can tell immediately Zhao's planning something, and then the second they leave, yeah, he immediately sends a message to Fire Lord Ozai about what exactly happened. And our ending scene here for episode 2 is Ozai opens up the letter, reads it, and he knows now the Avatar has returned. And so this is our debut here for Daniel Dae Kim as Fire Lord Ozai, getting a brief scene here. But what were your thoughts on Zhao and then the Ozai scene at the end?
Yeah, I mean, for Zhao here, you definitely can, you get his character sense here. You get that he's undermining things that are happening here. He wants the best outcome for him, and that'll move him up in, sort of the Fire Nation hierarchy here, right? And Zuko doesn't quite have the full sense of the tact to deal with this sort of situation, which is why, it's good to have Iroh there to sort of at least give the illusion that they're going to be working together on this. So I don't know, it's something to think about, them having this sort of, pseudo, not really pseudo sort of partnership this early on in the show and the series, since they really were sort of like at odds and ends, and this is just going to put them at some interesting sort of conflicts. And the fact that the Fire Lord knows this early on, just throws a whole nother wrench into things in terms of who's going to be gunning for the Avatar, and the resources that are going to be allocated to this sort of endeavor, since it was a bit more limited earlier on initially. So it's definitely something to keep in mind as the episodes go forward, and I'm curious to see about it.
Mm-hmm. In terms of like an obvious change here, probably to address here, is that at least for me, I feel a pretty important scene, at least one that I always kind of remember and think is very good, is that they obviously don't have here a Zhao, Zuko, Agni Kai, at the very least in the position you would expect it to be in terms of like, where it is in the original 103. By the end of this episode, we're past the kind of 103 kind of marker. And obviously they're doing things differently, but they have made a decision to kind of not have that fight take place here. I obviously know if they do or don't do it, you don't, but I find it to be an interesting one here in terms of like one of the first kind of really notable scenes that they have just like, yep, they've cut it out of position. Like very, very completely. But I don't know. What watching through the episodes, did you notice much of that stuff that like, oh, this scene from the original wasn't here or whatever?
Uh, yeah, I tried not to do it as much as I did in the first episode. I think I did it all the time in the first episode, even though I felt that the episode itself worked fine. But yeah, you definitely, I think, it's hard to take those things away, especially, that scene was, it's just a cool scene in general, just to see them sort of fight in the Agni Kai and, that sort of bending. I think, any of those sort of like bending highlight points in the episodes is always something to note when they don't have it. And, who knows if it's just because of story and how they choose to wrote it, or if it's, more of a production thing or, budget or anything like that. Um, I think it would have been cool, to have it there. Again, I don't know if it comes later on, because it could still work later on, especially since we know they have this sort of pseudo, partnership here, but there's still some backhanded dealings going on. So I don't know. I think there's a lot that they can do with it, and I'm curious to see how it eventually all turns up.
So, okay, yeah, we'll wrap the podcast up here with our final thoughts on episode 2. Overall, again, I thought it was really good. At least for me, episode 1 and 2 are, in my mind, two of the best episodes of the series overall. So like it has a really good start across the first two episodes, and yeah, they do it really well. Obviously Kyoshi hype and Suki hype and stuff like that, but Suki's done well, Sokka's done well, even accounting for some of the changes. The Zuko Zhao stuff, I like that. Okay, it wasn't in the first episode, but we do it here for the most part. Outside of like some scene absences, I think they managed to incorporate using Zhao in Kyoshi pretty well, to account for like the timing of when certain things are taking place in this version. So that all comes together well. I think in reflection, there's probably a discussion to maybe be had about how they do give Kyoshi quite a lot of like Roku's role within the series, and it obviously kind of takes away a little bit of the whole idea of like Roku's the avatar before Aang. That's meant to be like the really important past life, is the one directly before. But Kyoshi is the avatar in the intro as well, not Roku. And they give her the avatar state scene and the first past life scene, which I understand because, of course, we go to Kyoshi Island before we go to Crescent Island. But it's just an interesting kind of decision. Like, I've seen the Roku involvement, you haven't, but I would definitely say that like I feel they maybe do a little bit too much with Kyoshi, and Roku doesn't get to do as much. But we'll discuss that stuff when we get to it later on. But I like that we give extra past life focus in the episodes overall, and I think this one is a really good example of, I think, changes, additions, cuts working overall pretty well within the book overall. And like we went through, I don't have too many problems, just mainly slight adjustments that would have, I think, overall made things just flow better than they already do. So your final thoughts on episode 2?
Yeah, I think for me, this episode worked pretty well. I like sort of the overall flow, the overall idea of sort of getting to Kyoshi Island, sort of getting Aang, sort of up to speed with, sort of the Avatar state. He still doesn't, quite have a grasp on sort of his training, and, there's still some issues that he has to work out with really sort of like accepting his duties, but at least he's, they've directed him towards like the direct path, and they've done it in, a pretty sort of quick way. Like, he knows something's happening. He knows he has to protect things. It seems like he's willing a little bit more to sort of accept that fact, but he's still, he's still the core sort of character that he is and that we know of. And that's sort of, why we, are so interested in following his sort of journey here. And, it was really cool to get to see, Kyoshi Island this early on, and everything with Kyoshi, that stuff is always pretty interesting. Is it maybe, a too much more emphasis on her than sort of Roku? I don't know, but, in terms of like, trying to make the show appeal to sort of audiences and the current sort of, zeitgeist of what's sort of popular. I don't know. I can see why they would sort of go with her sort of character here. And, me personally, it's fine. I like the books. The books are probably one of my more favorite ones. So I can see why they went with that. So for me, episode 2 definitely works.
Yeah, there's a little bit coming out of this where I'm so glad Roku's getting his book. He'll finally get his chance to shine in the way the novels have helped other avatars to shine. He really needs it at this point, because he sometimes does take a little bit of a beating in the fandom because he gets blamed for the war and that sort of thing. But we'll get there. So I suppose we'll just wrap up with you have not seen the remaining episodes. Now that you've seen 2, how do you feel heading into episode 3, Omashu?
Oh, that's a good point. I don't know. That's a good one. I don't know. I'm pretty still, on the train of this being really cool and interesting to watch. I'll probably watch, at least the next 2, probably today at some point. So no, I think I'm curious to see how they go with things, especially, getting to Omashu, this sort of fast, and the characters that we get to see in that one, hopefully. I don't know if I'll see them or not. I'm pretty, jazzed to see how that sort of turns out, especially getting to see, more earthbending, since we got a little bit of that in the first episode. So I can see how it could work out. So I'm interested to see how it works on a grander scale.
Yeah, and I'm interested to discuss the remaining episodes because definitely what I find is that with this show, it was cool going through these ones, but these are the more accurate to source material episodes. We're getting into the stuff where massive changes, just enforced by the amount of episodes, have to happen in the remaining episodes. That we've only done 4 episodes of the original, and we've got 6 episodes left, and we have a 2-part finale, so 4 episodes to cover 13 episodes or something like that. You can see where, okay, some big cuts and changes are going to have to happen. We've been mostly okay with what's been in the first 2, but this is where much bigger things are going to kind of come into play. And then factor in that we've not really yet seen some of the extra Ozai stuff or the Azula stuff, the additions and all these type of things. And it's it's going to be a bit of a different discussion for the remaining the next couple of episodes anyway. So I'm excited for it though, because that's what I find that's to be so interesting about this show, is that when we're finally actually going to get into those big changes, some of them, as giant as they are kind of interesting to see. Oh, that was actually quite clever. Maybe it doesn't work out perfectly, but it's pretty clever the way you did that. That's going to be the exciting part of the upcoming discussions. But we will get to them over the coming weeks. Of course, this is the issue with all 8 episodes coming out at once. There's only so much time to talk about everything, and I think a lot of people are kind of struggling just to compile their thoughts together and stuff like that. So we're taking our time to go through it episode by episode. But that's been N102 Warriors. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye-bye.